Hi everybody, happy Monday. It's Mr. Flynn here with another video, but this one's going to be short, a lot shorter than the Sigmund Freud and Abraham Maslow video. But I hope that you're going to find it interesting. So if you look in the content section in the hub, you're going to see that I've deposited another PowerPoint, and so this is our next lesson, and this lesson is with regard to personality. So trying to answer a little bit of the question, what is personality? And then I've got a very short reflective writing response. It's a very free and open assignment. I'm going to get to that when I get through it. So pause the video right now, go to the hub, go to the content section under psychology, and open up the PowerPoint that says, what is personality? Perfect. So you got your PowerPoint open, and just click through the slides, again, just like we did with the Freud slide, and we're going to go from there. Okay, so I'm going to start, the first slide is actually kind of interesting. The image there, by the way, this isn't my PowerPoint. I've adapted it. I got it from another professional, a teacher who knows a little bit more about psychology than I, so credit to that teacher. So this one isn't mine, so I can't take credit for work that isn't mine. That's very important, especially in the social sciences. But this one's a fantastic one. I've edited it a little bit and changed it for my purposes. But the image that's been chosen here is really interesting. You can see the head there with some puzzle pieces out. That is very much symbolic of how early psychoanalysts like Freud and like the guy we're going to talk about today, Carl Jung, that's kind of an influential model in how they looked at the human psyche with regard to its elements and its pieces, and how those elements and pieces form together to create a larger whole. So just like when you're doing a puzzle, maybe over the quarantine you've done what me and my family have done, and you've done some puzzles. I've actually got one on the table right now that we're working on. That's a great metaphor for how they saw the human psyche. So again, not the physiological brain, not the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the corpus callosum, all that stuff. I mean what happens inside the brain, the mind, right? The processes within. So trying to understand, for example, if someone in their 20s has never broken the law before, but all of a sudden goes out and steals a car. So trying to get to the root of what led that person to that decision would be one of the goals of psychoanalysis. And going back to the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, and what is happening in the background and the static and all the composite pieces that make that individual, and finally what led that individual to make those choices. Could be good choices as well as bad. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide right now. I promised this would be shorter, so I'm going to keep my promise if I can. I know Mr. Flynn likes to talk too much, but that's okay. So the next slide says, how would you define personality? I just want you to stop for a second and think about that very question. How would you define personality? Now, pretend that an alien came down and was examining humans, and you're the person who gets to talk to the alien, and you're talking about the people that you know, and you're talking, well, everyone has a different personality. The alien stops you and says, wait a second, what is personality? And then you were to try and explain what a personality is to that alien, I think you're going to find that's a pretty difficult thing. And once we get into it a little bit deeper, so you might say things like, well, that's a person's likes, that's a person's dislikes, that's a person's proclivities or habits or tendencies. That's what a person gravitates toward, and that's what they're repulsed by. The personality is what leads them to make choices in life. So what makes this person, for example, really enjoy going to math class, and what makes this person really enjoy going to English class? And you would say, well, part of that's personality, right? Those kinds of things. But if we're talking about it from a psychological standpoint, it's a little bit more difficult of a question, and I'm going to show you why. So as an example, when you and I go to the movie theater, one of the things that we think about enjoying is popcorn. And that's great. So I can't even really think about going to the movie theater without thinking about popcorn. Now, is that part of my personality, or has that been pressed onto my personality by the dominant society? And before you answer too quickly, I want you to think for a second that in some movie theaters in Middle America, the preferred snack of choice is dried ants, baked and dried ants and other insects, especially ants. So think about going through the movie theater and eating handfuls of that as you're watching a film. But that is enjoyable in that part of the world as opposed to popcorn. So how much of your personality is actually you? And how much of your personality is only the result of the dominant society that provides a series of choices, limited number of choices actually, and we choose them. So as an example, I'm a motorcycle guy, right? So I love sport bike motorcycles. I'm not a big fan of Harley Davidsons. However, the people that are Harley Davidson fans are big fans of Harley Davidsons and tend to not like sport bikes as much. So, how did each of us come to these decisions and these choices and these preferences that we're so stuck on? Well, we are only limited by the choices we had within our society, Harleys or sport bikes. But what if there's a third option we've never been exposed to? Think about that for a second. Try and also think about the fact that you are really, what they call it, a social engram. You're really a composite of all of the personalities that have influenced you and impacted you in your life. So, for example, the language that you speak is a direct result of contact with your primary caregiver. For most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, that is our biological parent. Spending a lot of time with mom, at first doing, the baby talk and the cooing noises. I think I've talked about that in class. And then as it evolves into more complex modes of communication, that shapes your personality and who you are, right? Your favorite food, bang. A lot of you said pizza, right? I don't know. I love pizza. Well, pizza is only an available option in our society. What if you're in another society where they didn't have pizza as a viable option, or it wasn't as common? It wouldn't be one of your favorite foods. Okay, pressing right along. As I said, I keep it short, and I'm already 6 minutes in. Okay, so a definition for personality from the slide deck. It says personality is an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. So thinking, the thoughts that are internal, feeling, how you emotionally respond to situations, and acting, the choices you make throughout your daily life. Next slide. This is the most detailed slide. It's the only one with a lot of text on it. This is a very short slide deck, mercifully short compared to Mr. Flynn's other ones, so hopefully we're all happy about that. And the gentleman we're talking about today is Carl Gustav Jung. And it just says Carl Jung there, but his middle name is Gustav. He was actually a Swiss psychologist, and he was very interested in aspects of psychoanalytical theory. So I drew another little diagram here. So if you remember from our Sigmund Freud conversation, Sigmund Freud is the father of what we call psychoanalysis, right? Trying to get to the subconscious aspects of the mind that create drives and create motivations, whatever those desires are, right? And then he also talked about the idea that an inability to meet those desires, if it's frustrating enough, leads to neuroses. And those neuroses are negative psychological manifestations, whatever that is, right? So Mr. Flynn's, I've admitted in class many times that I'm obsessive compulsive, right? And I need to know where my keys are all the time. It's in a lanyard in my pocket. I'm always checking for it. I'm always touching the lanyard because that for me is security. If I don't know where my keys are, I get anxious. Maybe some of you are like that with your phone. I'm like that also with my phone. If I touch where my phone normally is, I can't find my phone. And then I become immediately anxious and I have to find my phone. Nothing else matters at that second until I find my phone. Freud would describe that as a neuroses, okay? Even though I know you and I might describe it as just a lifeline to our most important device. So anyway, back to Carl Jung. So Carl Jung was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, and they did work together for a period of time, although they diverged once they realized that their theories weren't going to jive. And Jung really liked Freud on a personal level, celebrated his work and so on, but really disagreed with a lot of things that Freud was saying, particularly with regard to sexuality and motivation and its connection to the conscious mind. Jung had his entire other body. He was a genius in his own right, and he created analytical psychology. Not the same as psychoanalysis, and I mean, you can do a bit more reading on your own. But say, for example, those two terms, introvert and extrovert. So maybe you've heard those terms before. So an introvert is just someone who prefers a lower degree of social interaction, whereas an extrovert will seek out social interaction. So an extrovert is the first one to step forward and shake hands, make eye contact, very conversant, talks a lot in a group and things like that. I think that I would describe myself as a bit more extroverted than an introverted person. An introvert tends to be a little bit quieter. Perhaps we might describe them as shy. They're a little more laconic, and so on and so forth. So, and those terms, if you've ever used those terms, you're using terms that were crafted for this purpose by Carl Jung, which I find interesting. So you can see in the slide deck, he's a Swiss psychologist. He contributed a great deal to our understanding of personality. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but he created 4 functional types of personality. So there's a thinking, the person that uses reason, a feeling, the person who uses emotion, a sensation, somebody who is very sensory oriented, and intuition, somebody who uses perception. And there are degrees, right? So you're not an entirely thinking person, meaning you do not use any intuitive processes. That's not what he was saying. he was talking about dominant personality archetypes. And there's another Jung term, archetype. You can study more of that on your own, but just a quick mention about archetypes. So have you ever noticed, for example, that in many films there's a wise old figure? So you go to the Star Wars movies, for example, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, these are the wise old figure on the hill, right? If you watch old samurai movies, there's a great director named Akira Kurosawa. He made one of the masterpieces he made many, but the Seven Samurai and so on. These samurai type stories where a young person has to go off and learn from an older master the techniques of sword making or swordsmanship or whatever the case may be. That old man on the hill archetype, there's an example of a Jungian archetype. And you can see these archetypes as they manifest in story after story after story. So maybe you can think of some examples on your own that I'm not mentioning here. Okay, so Jung theorized that we consciously gravitate toward one functional type, while our unconscious gravitated toward the opposite. He thought that we were in conflict. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm going to introduce you to the main concept of Jung in just 1 second, and this is what I'm going to spend more time on. And psychometrics, the idea is basically you can use questionnaires and tests. At the end of this slide deck, I'm going to ask you to actually engage in a questionnaire for your personality type, and I'm going to get there in just a second. So the big, it's not in the slide deck, so I thought I would just sort of include this because if you go off to university or college, you may hear Carl Gustav Jung and then this term, individuation. This is kind of his pièce de résistance kind of thing. This is still heavily relied upon in many ways, although in slightly altered forms by psychologists and psychometrists today. Psychometrists are people that measure our intellectual processes. So psychometric, psychometrist, breaking down the word kind of thing that we do. So individuation. And this is really very simple. It's basically a lifelong psychological process. So from the time you're born, right to you shuffle off this mortal coil, as Shakespeare would say, it's a process wherein you are trying to separate yourself from a collective, if you will. And you're trying to do that, you're differentiating yourself from your conscious and unconscious elements. And what that means is all the things that are affecting you consciously, but also unconsciously. He wasn't discounting what Freud said about the subconscious mind, certainly, and he actually agreed, and he had his own version of it, but they agreed that there was a subconscious mind that played a massive role in our choices and our behavior. So that individuation, trying to figure out an identity from a collective, since we are social creatures, very few of us are raised in isolation. As you know from earlier lessons, those people are called isolates, and some of those kids, feral children, for example, that are raised by animals, and isolates that are completely raised without any contact whatsoever, and the catastrophic damage that does. Well, most of us don't have that situation. We are in this social collective. So we start in our family unit or whatever our primary caregiver situation is, might be a grandparent, might be an adoptive family, or whatever the case may be. That shapes our personality. And from there, we try and individuate. We try and create or carve out our own self. It's a lifelong psychological process and it never changes. So that's kind of interesting too. Okay, moving on to the next slide. It says think, pair, share, but we can't do that today. But if you want to just pause the video at the end of this sentence and just try and pencil down a couple of ideas about what do you think are a list of characteristics that describe an introvert. So I mentioned a few in the video already, so maybe you already have those. And then like in a T-cell kind of a diagram, just sketch it out for yourself. This isn't for marks, this is just for you to think about. A few characteristics that you think are emblematic of extroverts. So just pause the video right now and take a second to do that. Welcome back. I'm hoping some of you actually did that. I don't know. And then the next slide, it says, what characteristics did you come up with? So you're supposed to discuss it. Normally we would have a discussion in class, which we are going to try and do on Wednesday. I'm going to hold another virtual classroom and see who shows up. Maybe we can talk about some of these ideas, okay? Now, there's a TED Talk there. I've mentioned TED Talks in class. TED Talks are one of my favorite resources to learn something new, and often something that I've never thought of before. TED Talks tend to, pardon me, they tend to sort of go into areas that I'm unfamiliar with and things I need to know. So you can watch that video at your leisure and learn a little bit more. Okay, the next one is the big 5 personality types. Okay, so these are personality types that we still use today. If you look at so I'm on slide number 8. Okay, slide number 8. You can see there's a chart there, and it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay, neuroticism. So you can see there's descriptions. So I'm going to let you read those on your own. But basically, the one that's the tough, I mean, you know what agreeableness is, but the one that may be the toughest to get your brain around is neuroticism. So that's an anxious / insecure versus calm / secure state. So anxious, insecure versus calm and secure. The degree to which you feel one or the other, right? Many of us feel anxious in certain social situations. Some of us feel less so. So that's that measure right there. If you look on the left-hand side at the letters going down, it's an acronym, and it spells OCEAN, which can help you remember the 5 personality types, right? So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then neuroticism. OCEAN, right? A mnemonic to help you remember that, which I think is kind of handy. Now, the next thing, and the only thing I've asked you to do is I've included a link in the PowerPoint to a personality test. I'd like you to go out and try this personality test. It's very non-invasive. There are only 3 pages to the test. It is absolutely free. You don't have to sign up. You have to give them a bit of information. So your age, your gender, if you wish to identify. And then I forget the third question they ask. But they don't have to give an email address. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to give a visa, which is very important. So I want you to try and take that test. It's only 3 pages. Taking the whole test took me 3 minutes, or 4 minutes maybe. It's very short. And then identify what you think are the pros and cons of being introverted and extroverted. And then from that, I want you to write a 2 to 3 paragraph reflection piece that discusses the results of this test and how it pertains to you. So for example, do you feel like tests like this are accurate? So when you do your results, I want you to read the descriptors. It gives you some pretty good descriptors about what your results could be. Do you think they're accurate? Does it describe you? I know when you go to a horoscope, you're like, oh my gosh, that's so me. And then you read Sagittarius, you're like, that is also me. And then you read Virgo, you're like, oh, that's also me, right? I mean, that's kind of horoscopy. Hopefully this is a little more accurate than that, right? So that's kind of what we're aiming for. And so what benefits do you think a test like this could have for you? So for example, if I score higher in neuroticism, might that give me a bit of reflection pieces about something I could work on with regard to my personality and personal growth? I don't know. Who knows? And then I also want you to answer the question, could tests like this do any harm potentially? Is there a negative side to taking tests like these? And then finally, offer any reflections that strike you, and you're free to use first person. And then the last slide is just some sources that were used in the making of this PowerPoint. Okay, that's 18 minutes. That's way longer than I intended. Again, I'm going to be having a virtual classroom meeting on this Wednesday, after this video was made and posted. And we're going to go from there. Thank you all for being patient enough to listen to my videos.